All right. So Bitcoin boosted by Grayscale SEC court decision. What is going on there? So the SEC has been ruled against the SEC. Now, that doesn't mean that the ETF is approved, like some headlines that were going around pretty much alluded to. The SEC may still come back with new issues, but the market is priced this as quite positive, making it look like we are much closer to an ETF approval for Grayscale, and then probably for all the other various providers who want to provide ETFs. So this was a piece of news flow that was not really expected so soon. A lot of people were starting to price the timing for the ETFs to be late this year, early next year, and this may have accelerated that process, right? So that's kind of how the market is. What is going? If we jump to the charts, we can see here. So we were languishing down at 26K. So the SEC actually thought, given that sort of down drop and that kind of consolidation, I thought we were going to get a leg down, at least 25K. Wasn't meant to be. We actually then found ourselves very quickly back up to 28K. It has faded a little bit overnight from the highs, but that does look much more encouraging now. So this is the new range that's been established, 25K versus 28K. On Ethereum, we're looking at 1,600 being the support, 1,800 being the resistance. Same sort of story, but Ethereum's not in the driving seat by any means. It's all about Bitcoin and the narrative around the ETFs. And the institutional adoption that is going to bring into the space. Okay, so that's what's going on, and that was the big news flow that we got yesterday, which meant that there was really no point in me sending out the report, which was completely stale and wouldn't have made any sense. So I wanted to see what the vol reaction was, so I could give you more up-to-date data, and we could have a look at this market. Okay. I won't go into the alts. Like I said, I don't really know what's going on in alt space, so read that at your own leisure. Let's jump straight into realized vol. Okay, so we got a drop of about 20 to 30 vol points as the market stabilized last week from these quite high realized vol numbers. We did smack straight back down, although the uplift we got yesterday has got Bitcoin back up to around, well, both Bitcoin and Ethereum realized are back to around 40%, okay, through that explosion that we got higher. Now, short-dated implieds did recover in Bitcoin. They were down about 5 vol points, but they're back to unched on the week. Whereas Ethereum vols, as you can see, barely bounced, right? They just didn't do anything, even though Ethereum popped 5%. So you can see there's definitely a lot more supply in Ethereum vol around. No one's rushing to buy calls on Ethereum necessarily in the same size. It's really moving the vol. So Ethereum vol still under pressure. Volatility carry, as a result, is at 0 on Bitcoin and is negative in Ethereum because realized has popped, whereas implieds haven't. So you could argue that Ethereum gamma is a bit too cheap right now. But looking at the positioning, which we'll talk about in a bit, you might not want to rush out and buy a load of Ethereum gamma. And certainly the street doesn't want to right now. Okay, that's realized vol. Jumping over to term structure. So you can see on the week, we saw a bit of an uptick in the front end, the weeklies, and a bit of an uptick in the back end with 1 month pretty much staying unchanged. Now, that was a bit of a two-step process. We did actually see a contango happening before that latest 8% spike. But what was happening was the back end was catching a bid. The front end was getting offered by about 5 vols. But now the front end has suddenly caught up. That ended up higher on the week as well. But the back end caught a bid first of around 2 vols, as we did see buyers of June 24, Deck 23 outright calls. Last week, we saw those buyers, which did pump that vol up a bit. And like I said, the front end was drifting down because the gamma wasn't performing. And then suddenly the front end was re-rated because the gamma became spectacular yesterday with that 8% move. Now, Ethereum, you can see over the week is a bit of a downshift. Long end holding up better, only down half a vol. Front end down about 3 to 4 vols. It was more than that, but it has had a very small bounce after that pop yesterday. Same story, you know, Ethereum vol seems better supplied, which is why the vol just continues to see supply, see offers, and that front end gamma not able to catch as much of a bid because people are more excited about the Bitcoin story than they are about Ethereum because it doesn't really have its own catalyst right now. Okay, looking at relative value. So obviously those moves that I've just described are the reason why we've seen the spread Ethereum versus Bitcoin vol spread collapse. We're looking at roughly a uniform spread of 5 to 6 vols negative right now across the curve. Really, Ethereum vol, just no one really wants it relative to Bitcoin. So you can see on this chart, we're pretty much down at the lows on this chart going back 6 months. But even if you go back longer than that, it doesn't really ever get down here. So this is quite an interesting state for the market where Ethereum vol trades significantly below Bitcoin, and it's stayed there for months, right? This is not a flash in the pan type move. It has been here now for many, many months, and it's been a consistent drift lower in the medium term vol, and even when you get little pops and little moves like we got on the downside, that back end vol has got a memory now saying that no, Ethereum's really got to prove itself if it wants the implied vol to go back trading above Bitcoin. And right now, that's just not happening at all. Okay, I do think a lot of this is because of flows and these really large, chunky overwriting flows that have been happening in September and December, etc. In Ethereum, really overwhelming the market, and the market makers are just tired of getting stuffed in this vol and not able to make money out of it. And that is happening. There will be a resurgence at some point, right? And I think it's going to be a case of Bitcoin gets his ETF approval. We see a move back up through 40K. The crypto space suddenly gets attention. Then everyone starts talking about Ethereum ETFs, and these instos want to diversify and not just be in Bitcoin, but they're willing to allocate capital into Ethereum. And that story starts to gain traction. Then you will see a re-rating in Ethereum, but very hard to call the timing on that. So people just are not rushing to it, basically, right? So they're going with the story that's in front of them, which is Bitcoin and the halving as well. Okay. Looking at SKEW, it had been holding put premium in the front end as it did look like we were going to test the downside supports at the low end of the range, but the spike has obviously triggered a massive repricing. So we've seen a call premium come back across the entire curve on Bitcoin of around 5 vol points. Ethereum SKEW had also been in consistent put premium of about 4 vols across the curve, except for the back end. It's now that put premium is kind of dissipated. So we're looking at much more neutral SKEW, except for a small call. So we've got a small call SKEW in the front end, in the weeklies, for example. But the rest of the maturities are kind of a bit more neutral now. Now, the sharp repricing in SKEW when a big spot move happens shows that crypto markets or crypto options markets are being used for more directional speculation than for structural hedging like what we see in TradFi. Okay, so we do think this will change over time. And if the ETFs bring in institutional players into the space with, billions we're talking about, then we may start to see more consistent, stable put SKEW, particularly in the long end expiries where people will structurally put risk reversals and things like that to hedge their exposure. But for now, that seems quite a long way off. So the volatility of SKEW is pretty dramatic, right? And you can see that here on this chart where this is the 1 month SKEW and it chops around pretty violently, okay? And the range, has been kind of -5 to +5. It's pretty dramatic, right? If you can go from a 5 vol positive to a 5 vol negative, and it can do it pretty quickly, and it just moves around in that range, the vol of SKEW is super high, right? Which makes it quite hard to trade SKEW because it's just so unstable. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I'd flag that because I thought that was quite interesting. Okay. Dashboards kind of saying vol's still quite low, where spot's a bit more neutral, back into the middle of the range. Obviously, Ethereum vol is going to be cheaper by about 5 vols. We've already said that. So if you did want to pick up Gamma, that seems to be the place. Negative carry of -7 vols right now. But like I say, there's a reason for it. Often that negative carry doesn't persist because the implied vol's forward looking and kind of knows. It's almost like the implied vol knows something that the realized is not going to stay there, basically, right? So that I'd just be wary of that. Okay. All right. Moving on to flow. So volumes were healthy. We saw obviously two-way flow, bit of bearish flow most of last week, and then obviously turned a bit bullish. We did see on-screen buyers of Deck 26 calls and June 24, 27K calls last week, before the rally. That long end catching a bid on the back of it. But then Gamma sellers were rewarded for most of the week, but obviously on this Grayscale rip, they did get stung if they kept that short Gamma. September and October puts and put spreads have been active in that region, sort of 25K and below. And then that was keeping put SKEW a little bit bid. And then obviously September call buyers have come in on this latest move, which has kind of mixed things up a bit. And that front end vol has rallied. Okay. If we now look at Ethereum, flows a little bit more muted here. Before the rally, we did see protection buys in September using the 1600 to 1400 strikes, and they're like using near dated puts, either this week or even end of September. Now, yesterday's surge did bring some call demand back. We saw September calls being bought, 1900 and 2000 strikes. We saw October 1900s, and we saw December 1800s. So we have seen call buying. It doesn't seem to have done anything to the vol because there's just too much supply around. The market makers probably happy to offload it. But we have seen a few bids come back for upside in Ethereum vol as well. Okay, so that's your flows. Looking at how the gamma positioning landscape is moving, fairly neutral after the expiry rolled off last Friday. It was a bit short. Local strikes in Bitcoin. You can see here, we were in short. We went back to positive. We've drifted back to neutral to slightly negative on this recent rally. These blue bars represent 1st of September expiry options versus longs in regular September. So you can see here, it's kind of like the street's got a little bit of a calendar on where they're short this week versus long end of September. But overall, they're fairly neutral in terms of Bitcoin gamma. If we look at Ethereum, it is positive gamma. Where's that coming from? The big 1900 area where the street seems to be quite long, September and October. We've also got longs kind of in the 1700 area as well. But we have got some shorts for this week as well. So a few very, very short dated buyers have come in. So those are keeping dealers' positions a bit more neutral. Once those shorts roll off, you'd expect the gamma positioning to, if without any incremental flow, that gamma positioning is a bit longer again, right? And maybe going to pin the market a bit more. But right now, I don't think the gamma positions are big enough to really warrant, to really say that they're going to have a massive impact, right? It's going to be more headline driven and maybe even a bit more macro driven, right? If we do get any moves out of NFP and if that filters through to the dollar movement, okay? What have I been up to? That's the summary for this week in crypto. Thanks a lot. As always, I'll catch you guys later.